This month on Newton Newsmakers, the roads get plowed, but our sidewalks are still a mess. Just about everybody seems to agree we need to do a better job, but can we agree on how? Whose job is it to clear Newton's snow-covered sidewalks, and is it time to bring back a mandatory snow shoveling ordinance? We'll talk with four distinguished guests who are in the know on the snow next on the February 2010 edition of Newton Newsmakers.
Newton Newsmakers is made possible through the generous support of First Commons Bank, Beacon Street in Newton Center, representing the future of banking with an inviting environment, the latest banking technologies, and a personal touch to make banking convenient, simple, and sensible. Also at firstcommonsbank.com.
Hi and welcome everybody to Newton Newsmakers. It's Newton's local political roundtable discussion program. I'm Charlie Shapiro. Have you shoveled your sidewalk lately? By most accounts, Newton's Department of Public Works does a good job of snow removal from our roads, but what about the sidewalks? Whose job is it to take care of those sidewalks? It's a hot topic. It involves public safety, equal access, personal responsibility, and a whole host of legal issues. And with us to tackle the topic today, Alderman and Snow Committee Chair Vicki Danberg, also Alderman Swiston on the Snow Committee as well, former Alderman John Stewart of Newton Lower Falls, and Maryan Amaral from Citizens for Access. First of all, thanks everybody for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here, Charlie.
Great. So let's start with Vicki. You're the chair of the Snow Committee in Newton. Can you set this up a little bit, how we got where we are, and what is the Snow Committee, other than the obvious, and what is it that the goal of the Snow Committee would be?
I'd be happy to do that. In around, I think it was 1991, the City of Newton instituted an ordinance to clear snow from, requiring residents to clear snow from sidewalks. The ordinance lasted more or less a year. It ran into political trouble and it was overturned. Since then, there has been no legal ordinance that requires residents to clear the snow from their walks, and it has caused some problems. We are, as a society, trying to increase the walkability and the bikeability of our villages and our cities and towns, and part of that, and a very important piece to that, is the ability to use our sidewalks. We are trying to encourage our children to walk to school. There is a Safe Routes to School group that is very active, and they are trying to get children to walk not only in good weather, but in the snow when it's cold out. There's no reason why kids can't go out and enjoy walking to school when it's cold out, but they really can't do that if there is snow on the sidewalks, especially at the curbs where plows, whether they be city or private, have not done a good job of keeping the sidewalks clear when they do plowing.
So your goal is what?
The goal of our committee is to examine all of the pieces of the issue around, and the issues around snow removal. Look at what the problems are, see what kind of solutions we can find, and in the end come up with recommendations regarding what the city should be doing now and what ordinance changes, if any, there ought to be so that we can improve the walkability of the city.
Great. So that kind of lays out the beginning of it a little bit. Swiston is also an alderman here in Newton. You're on the Snow Committee as well. I'll point out that Deb Crossley was on the show last month, and we would have had her on as well because she's also on the Snow Committee. But you know, to try to spread things around a little bit, so to speak, we want to just have different people on. So what is your take on all this, Alderman Swiston?
Well, I've always been a proponent of more of walkability, of being able to get around. Personally, my kids now are of middle school age, and I will tell you, I really appreciate that they can get themselves around. My son's got about a 2-mile radius on his bike, and what I really wanted was for him to have a passenger seat so he could take his sister where in that 2-mile radius with him. But I think that having better sidewalk access, there's a number of reasons. You know, we have a lot of people who don't drive who still need to be able to get around, and whether it's by foot, by wheelchair, or by bicycle, you need your sidewalks. So being able to make use, year-round use of our sidewalks, I think is really important.
And your thoughts on the idea of a mandatory snow shoveling ordinance for residents versus city responsibility? Where would you be in that whole mix?
You know, I think that that's an option. I always think that a city ordinance should be your, you know, last ditch, because you can't get it done any other way. I think that what our city really needs to look at is our attitude towards walkability. There are people who desire walkability, but I think a lot of people just talk about it and don't actually do it, and so it's all a theoretical exercise. And I think that if we can get everybody behind, there are a lot of communities where walking is it is a integral fabric of the community, in that a lot of people don't even own cars. They rely on public transportation and do a lot of walking, and so to get to a point of having clear sidewalks is a no-brainer. We want to get there. I think we need to get there in Newton as well, and I think it's going to take, I think we're getting there. There's awareness is the first start.
Okay. John Stewart, not to be confused with The Daily Show, and I'm sure you get that fairly often, former alderman. Thanks for coming, I appreciate it. Now, you served 3 different terms on the Newton Board of Aldermen, so this is probably not a new topic for you?
It is not a new topic at all. I was on the Board of Aldermen in the 1970s, in the mid-1970s, and I well remember being involved in discussions of snow removal on sidewalks. I was also on the board in the late 80s and early 90s. And I'm embarrassed to say, but I think I voted on the ordinance in 1991. If in fact that was the year it was passed, and I was a member of the board, and I believe I voted for it, but I may not have. I remember it being a very, very difficult decision. And then I was on the board in the early part of this decade, from 2001 to 2005. And was heavily involved in several discussions about snow removal on sidewalks, and there was consideration of bringing back the ordinance. So it's an old subject. It's something that people have talked about at City Hall for many, many, many years, and it's very controversial. I don't disagree at all with Vicky's description of the problem. I don't disagree at all that you know, there is a problem, a very serious problem. The only thing I disagree with is that an ordinance is the solution. An ordinance may be part of the solution, but not necessarily, because there are lots and lots of problems with an ordinance that would literally force everybody to clean the sidewalk in front of their houses. Okay.
Maryan Amaral, so you see this from a little bit different perspective. The group that you're a part of, Citizens for Access. So first, what is Citizens for Access?
Okay.
And second, what's your involvement with this particular issue, your interest in this issue?
Okay, sure. Citizens for Access is a nonprofit organization that was founded several years ago, where we advocate for people with disabilities, physical disabilities. Several years ago, we filed complaints about curb cuts in the city of Newton, and they were put all around the city, beautiful curb cuts that apparently are just fair weather curb cuts, because we can't use them in the winter when we have snowy mountain curb cuts on there. The work that we have done has been more education focused, and looking at, for instance, that City of Newton is a Title II entity, public entity, and what are the ADA regulations and the laws that would require for the city to keep up the sidewalks for full access.
So how do you see it in terms of what's the city's responsibility if the city has one?
Sure.
And what's the residents' responsibility if they have one?
Okay, sure.
In other words, where does it start, where does it end in your mind?